So far we've been working with named functions. So for example, function validate password and then some parameters and then the body of the function. Validate password is the name and I use that to refer to the function in calls. So get input value and clear message and so on. But in JavaScript, functions can be anonymous. So you can create a function that doesn't have any name. And the way that looks is basically function, and then you have a parameter list, which can have parameters if you want, and a body, just like a regular function, and then put anything in there that you want. So it looks exactly like a regular named function, except that there's no function name here. And when you execute this bit of code, it creates a function, which is actually a type of object. So in JavaScript, a function is an object, and this piece of code returns a function object as its value. Now, you can save that, or you can print it, or do anything you can do with any other value. So for example, if you had a variable x, which was equal to 3, you could console.write x, and 3 would appear in the console. This is an object, which is a function, and it behaves the same way. So if I had a variable x, and I set x equal to the return value of this thing, x would now be a function. So I'll go ahead and do that. Yeah. Actually, let me undo here. So var x equals that function. And I'm going to go ahead and save. And then if I go to Chrome and hit reload, and then go to the console and type x, there's the value of the variable x. It's this function object. So how would I call x? Well, I call x the same way as I call any other function. So I say x, open paren, close paren, and hit return, and it writes hello to the console, just like any other named function. So what's the difference between saying function y console.log hello and saying var x equals function open close curly bracket console.log hello close curly bracket? Well, there's one technical difference having to do with when the function is available and defined. So if you do a named function like this, this definition is lifted to the top. So I can refer to init anywhere inside of this file, even before this function definition. But here, in this version, this is just like any other variable assignment. This is setting the variable x to a value, the same as if I was setting it to 3. And that's always going to happen in sequence. So wherever I have this var x equals, and then this code just creates an object, only then is x going to have that value. So I can't call x until after I've executed that bit of code. So that's really the only difference between a named function and an anonymous function in JavaScript, is that this gets lifted to the top, this doesn't. This happens in sequence. Now, as a consequence of that, the book will tell you that code like this, if some condition equal true, then define this function, else define some other function. Something else. So the reason this is a bad thing is because init gets lifted. It gets evaluated before the rest of the code gets evaluated, before this if statement gets evaluated. And so it's not clear which version of init you're actually going to get. Are you going to get the first one, the second one? We can't execute this condition yet because we're not there yet. So that doesn't make any sense and is actively discouraged. But what about this? And I'll go ahead and move this var to the top. Okay, so now in this tail of the if statement, I'm setting x to be the function that logs goodbye. In this tail, in the else clause, I'm setting x to be a different function that says hello. And this is perfectly okay because I know the sequence that this code is going to get executed in. Nothing is going to get lifted here. When I get to this bit of code, it's going to evaluate some condition. If that's equal to true, x will be set to this function. If this is not true, x will be set to this other function. So this is perfectly well defined and is considered okay. Whereas embedding name functions inside of code is discouraged. So why you would want to do this turns out to be a little advanced, but one of the places where you might want to do it is in event listeners. So you might want to put an anonymous function here. So on load function, and then I'm going to go ahead and just put my init code, which I unfortunately just deleted. So let's go ahead and actually, I'm going to undo everything. So get back to my init function. There we go. Okay. So let me get rid of this console.log. And then instead of declaring this init function, I'm going to put an anonymous function. And the code in that anonymous function is just going to be that code. And then I'll get rid of that. Okay, so rather than defining a separate init function, I just put the code that I want right here inside of that statement. And let's go ahead and make sure it still works. And it seems to. Now, there are some other reasons that you might want to do this that we'll be talking about a little bit later. But the basic idea here is that a function is just a value like any other value in JavaScript. It's an object which we'll be talking about later. And so you can pass it around, you can store it in variables, you can put it in arrays, you can do whatever you want with it, just like any other value.